This camera has a faster autofocus than the Sony A7 III. No, seriously, like, check this out.
Do just what you want. You're the one I trust, and I always be around when I need some loving, baby. No one else. Yeah. Let you down.
My first Sony camera was the Sony A6300, which I personally think is a really good camera to start out with if you can't afford a full-frame camera like the Sony A7 III, but like it is getting a little bit old right now, and that is probably why Sony released the A6400. I just want to say thank you for all the immense support that you guys give me here through the channels, you know, dropping your comments, giving me the thumbs up, and, you know, subscribing to the channel and having a good time here. So thank you for that. And if this is your first time watching me, then you might want to consider hitting that subscribe button because, you know, that'd be appreciated. The build quality of this camera feels really good and really solid, and personally I do like the form factor of the A6, like, can we call it the A6K series? Because I think, yeah, we're gonna do that. We're calling it A6K series from here on. I mean, look at the size of this thing. It's like the GM lens is basically bigger than the camera, right? So yeah, I like it. I don't know why Sony puts these things here, but like, it still has the same sensor size as the A6300 with 24.2 megapixels, which is just as much as the Sony A7 III. So the biggest improvements on this camera compared to the A6300 is definitely gonna be the flip-up screen here, and then you have the autofocus, which is just insane. And then you also have the microphones that is actually put in front of the camera instead of on top, which I personally think is really good, especially if you're like a run and gun vlogger. And I mean, like, this camera is going to be aimed at vloggers with this kind of flip-up screen, so is it any good to vlog with though? It is great weather here in Sweden. Is really good. Usually when I'm vlogging with the A7 III, I am keeping the camera like at this distance. Now I get to hold my arm almost like fully stretched out like this to get the same field of view as I would get on a full frame camera. So being able to see like the exposure and the framing and everything that is going on behind me is something that I really miss when I'm vlogging with my Sony A7 III. And something that I do notice though is that I'm looking at the display way more often. Like when I'm vlogging with my A7 III, I'm only looking in the lens because I don't see myself actually talking to you. So the difference between 16mm on a APS-C camera and a 16mm on a full frame camera is that this is 16mm on the Sony A6400 and this is 16mm on the Sony A7 III. So there is quite a big of a difference when you are shooting on a full frame camera compared to a crop sensor camera. I do think that the flip up screen is feeling like really fragile with this like L hinge that we got going on here. And like if I were to use this as a vlogging camera, I probably would break it because I'm not that really careful with my stuff, but it feels fragile and it probably like will be a lot of wear and tear that is gonna happen to this. It has this like weird way of like expanding, so like you can't like just push it in, you have to like drag it out and then up. So personally I would have loved if Sony did a flip out screen instead of a flip up screen, because like this doesn't feel like a future-proof solution, and like they probably have to do like that to actually like make sure that you can use all the necessities that you want to use as a vlogger. Because if you want to put an external microphone onto the camera's hot shoe like the Rode VideoMic Pro Plus, then you will not be able to see yourself. But since you have the microphones placed in front of this camera, then I don't think that like a external microphone will be necessary if you're doing like only running on vlogging, because I do actually think that the audio is quite good using the internal microphone. I really hope that they start with the flip out screen, because that would make things so much easier. It does shoot 4K up to 30 frames per second, which is really good, with a full sensor readout, which I personally think is great with the Sony cameras, because then you don't have to worry about like any kind of crop factor or anything like that. But when you're shooting 4K, there is a huge amount of rolling shutter in this camera. And comparing it to the A7 III, you can see that the rolling shutter on the A6400 is really bad. And that is a shame, because I do remember when I was using the A6300 that was one of my biggest issues when I was shooting 4K footage. So I did think that Sony would have fixed that for this camera, but apparently they haven't. And it can also shoot in 120 frames per second in full HD, which is great, because then you can get that really smooth B-roll when you're shooting your vlogs or whatever it is that you shoot. What I really like about this camera when it comes to video recording is that it doesn't have the 30-minute recording limit like the A7 III and the A7R III, which is a pain in the ass, to be honest, because like when you're recording videos like this one, then you always have to set a timer. 28 minutes. Start. You just want to keep it going and record the video that you want to record without having to like worry about like 30-minute intervals. So if you're doing like interviews or YouTube videos or anything similar to that, then that is a huge plus for this camera. Unfortunately, it does not have in-body image stabilization, which I think is really good to have, especially if you're like a vlogger or a content creator, because then you usually gotta shoot a lot of stuff on the go, and it's gonna be really hard for you to get that really smooth footage if you don't have the in-body image stabilization. There's probably gonna be a lot of different opinions on that, but personally I do think having both IBIS and a lens with OSS is crucial, because then you can get that really smooth footage when you're shooting a lot handheld. If you buy the camera with the kit lens, then the lens does have OSS, so it does like a pretty good job of reducing that micro jitter that comes when you're shooting handheld. But if you want to buy another lens for the camera and you do a lot of video, then you gotta make sure that the lens that you are about to buy have OSS, because otherwise you will probably get some shaky footage. The autofocus is incredibly fast, as you saw in the beginning, and I also did a test where I walked back and forth towards the camera and then jumped into frame, and the A6400 is really fast. Personally, I do like the look that full frame camera gives you, and that you don't have to like consider any kind of crop factors when you're buying lenses for your full frame camera. But I do think it works great to actually mount full frame lenses onto this camera, and all the footage that I've shot in this video with this camera is actually shot with the 16-35 f4 lens. I would definitely buy full frame lenses instead of APS-C lenses for this camera if I were to buy the A6400 or the A6500. And the reason for that is because if you wanna like upgrade from this camera to a full frame camera, like in a month or in a year or in 2 years or 5 years, they already got the lenses for the full frame camera, so you don't have to spend any kind of extra money to actually buy lenses for the full frame system. And that is gonna make the whole transition from crop sensor to a full frame really smooth. So the biggest issue that I had when I had the Sony A6300 was without a doubt the batteries, because like when I was shooting an event I had to use like 3 or 4 batteries in less than like 6 hours, and now when I'm shooting an event I'm using the A7 III or A7R III. I can shoot a single event on one single battery. Like it is very rarely that I have to change to another battery, and unfortunately this camera still has these small batteries, and that is something that is not good, because like these batteries will run out of juice really fast, especially if you do a lot of video. So I am personally a fan of full frame cameras, and I really like my A7 III and A7R III, but if I were to buy or recommend like a beginner's camera and you can't really afford the full frame system, then this is probably the camera that I would go for, because it is really good. Like the autofocus is great, it works really fast. You have the flip up screen if you want to vlog. You have all the different color profiles that you can set, the S-Log, the HLG, and then you have the slow-mo. Like it's just a really good all-around camera, and it is definitely a huge upgrade from the Sony A6300. And to be completely honest, I didn't think that it would be such a huge upgrade, but like since I've had the A6300, I do think that this is going to be the better option if you are going to buy your first camera, or if you want to have a backup camera but can't afford another A7 III or A7 Mark III. But if I were to recommend this or the Sony A7 III, then I would definitely recommend the Sony A7 III, because that is just a better camera in every single way. Maybe not the autofocus, but like it is really good. I would love to hear your thoughts on this camera. Would you buy this, or would you go for the A7 III, or which camera would you buy instead? Because like personally, I do think like it's a really good camera. So drop a comment below, and if you like the video, do give it a thumbs up, because that would be really appreciated. And if you haven't subscribed yet, that'd be really appreciated as well. So thank you so much for that, and you know, have a good one, and all the best from me here in Sweden, and wherever you are in the world. Hope your time of day is fantastic. Evening, morning, night, whatever it is at your place right now. Hope it's amazing. Thanks for watching, and så är det.